Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Girl Talk Live. I'm Jennie Gage of Life Take Two, where I share my escape from the grasp of the Mormon patriarchy. And I'm joined today with one of my favorite humans on the planet. And I don't say that superfluously, that's the truth. Miss Beth Magnetic. Hey, Beth.
Hi. Hey guys, I am Beth Magnetic, and I have transitioned from Mormon true crime to death by patriarchy, where we're going to be talking about all sorts of things where the patriarchy is killing people that they don't like. So, anyway, you can find me over on Substack, over here on YouTube, or on TikTok under that name.
Beth, can I say, first of all, that I'm so loving the transition to death by patriarchy. Being Mormon myself, I've always enjoyed Mormon true crime, but I love how you're expanding the lens and zooming out just a little bit to bigger and badder patriarchies in some ways and leaving Mormonism in that frame there. I'm totally loving it, completely on board with you, and can't wait to see what else you're going to do.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun to just be able to talk about things like eugenics or birth rates, like we're going to be talking about today.
What kind of nerdy thing scroll fun is this? Honestly,
So
these are
much
some
nerdy.
favorite things. And today we're going to dive into something that kept me up at night, literally scrolling in the middle of the night, 1 or 2 in the morning, reading what this brilliant woman has discovered. We're going to be diving into a Nobel Peace Prize. And this Nobel Peace Prize, in and of itself, is a huge deal because Claudia Goldin, who is an economic historian and a labor economist, is one of the first women to ever receive a Nobel Prize in this category. And she's the first solo woman to ever receive it on her own. So, a big deal. And what we're going to find out as we dive into this Nobel Prize is pretty simple, that the patriarchy is messing us up in ways that we don't even realize on the surface, and that men are living in a totally different era than the men of the past. But we women, we really haven't modernized. We're just living in a different setting, but we're stuck in the past. So we're going to dive into that today and see what this means. You
Yeah,
ready?
I am so ready. I'm so ready.
So, Beth, you hear the terms traditional family, traditional marriage, traditional wife, which people have abbreviated to trad wife, tossed around all the time. And I know that the term trad wife people talk about has just been invented and coined for social media. That's not the case. It was a term that was used in white supremacist organizations for many years. It was the trad wives, fasci femmes, and shield maidens. Those were the female categories in white supremacy. But people attribute it a lot right now to TikTok and social media because it's used around people like St. Williams, Nara Smith, and Hannah Neeleman, really none of whom are actual trad wives. But you and I come from a very patriarchal background. We come from Mormonism, where the term used to be housewife, homemaker. I called myself a stay-at-home mom because I got married in 1995. So we were transitioning out of housewife, like my mom would have labeled herself, into the SAM, the stay-at-home mom. But however you label it, we're all using that core term, traditional family. And I've had huge problems with traditional family as a term from the very get-go because these terms are actually lies. They're not accurate at all. And this amazing female economist, her name is Claudia Goldin, and you can find many of her articles all over the internet. You can read the Nobel Peace Prize itself, and we'll link it in the description on my YouTube here. She's just won this Nobel Peace Prize for blasting these concepts of traditional family to bits. So, Beth, traditional family is sold to us in America. I can't speak for the whole entire world, but I know America does influence the rest of the world. And this is something, it's a family pattern that happens all over the place. This is used to insinuate that a husband and wife getting married, having babies, and then the husband going out and being the provider and the woman staying at home in very pink and blue gendered roles within their relationship, within their family, and then zooming out to our communities and the nation at large, that this is in fact traditional. And the word traditional means something. What does traditional mean to you?
You would think that it would just mean the way that it was originally done, right? Traditionally, it was done X, Y, and Z way. But we've talked about this. That's really not the case with trad wives, that that they were completely living a very different set of lives even 100 years ago. And it's really this baby boomer era mindset that people have developed around what a wife is supposed to be. But I know that you have a lot of really good, deep thoughts on that. But yeah, you're the one that really pointed out to me that no, this is not what traditionally marriages looked like at any point until the last 80 years.
You and I both grew up in a patriarchy that taught us that the patriarchy had always existed. And we were basically I felt like I was using the same cookie cutter to cut out the pattern of my life, my family, my relationships as my mom had used, as my grandma had used, as her grandma, great grandma, and great grandma, all the way back to the beginning of time, right?
Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a stay-at-home mom, right?
Jesus was a stay-at-home mom. And literally going back to the very beginning of time. Can I bear my Mormon testimony to you for just a minute? Because even though I'm an ex-Mo, I still got it, I think. I believed that Heavenly Father created the universe with his bare hands, with his son, Jesus Christ. And that they created this beautiful Garden of Eden where he put his very firstborn man down here on earth. Out of that man's rib, he drew Eve. And he set the pattern for husband and wife, as the wife being this little helpmeet, the man naming the animals, the man tending the fruit, and the wife just toddling along beside, doing whatever he wanted her to do. And in the Mormon temple, we actually learned that pattern that the woman is supposed to be submissive to the man, that he is to be the provider. And I believed that this little foundational family, which we considered like the true heavenly unit of society, was patterned after our home in heaven. Because as every good Mormon girl knows, in the heavens are parents single? No, according to Eliza R. Snow.
The thought makes reason stare.
Truth is reason.
Truth eternal. Tells me I have a mother there. Tells me I have a mother there. Yes.
So as a Mormon, I believed, as you believed, that Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother were a nuclear family. Mm-hmm. Although I did have the belief that was a polygamous family, so it gets a little bit hazy there. But since polygamy was long gone before I was ever born, I was always picturing and just projecting what I saw in front of me onto God himself. This is the way that Heavenly Father wants the whole world to live. A father and a mother in very gendered roles. The man provides, the woman bakes and tends the children and folds the laundry. And that is tradition. That is the way humans have always done it for the entire history of the world. And then my date was October 15th, 2018, when I suddenly woke up and had a faith crisis. That was the best crisis that's ever happened to me. And you were...
July 28th, 2014 is when mine was.
Mm-hmm. It's your Freedom Day. So we both get to the other side of Mormonism and start to study history and science. And I very inadvertently stumbled upon genetics and archaeology and the actual history of humanity from anthropologists and sociologists. And lo and behold, I discovered, guess what? That traditional family?
It's completely a relatively modern social construct that exists to make it so that men can feel like kings in their own homes, so that they can have everything taken care of for them, and women can be put in their place and not fight back. In my opinion.
In my opinion, too. Not that I think that the men are necessarily behind this. It's the government and the societal institution that we have built around our population that's behind it. And as with any society, you have these social contracts that we're all engaging in, and we're just little robots going with the flow. I don't think that any of our husbands woke up every day and thought, how can I rule the roost? How can I be the king of the castle? No, they were just cookie cuttering what their dads and their grandpas and their great grandpas had done. And we are just we're subconscious dominant as humans. We're these little subconscious dominant robots going through life, doing what we're doing and labeling it all traditional when it's not traditional at all. If you really zoom out on the population of the world through all of known human history, it has been nuclear families, tribalism, with many adult mentors all collaborating together to raise a very small amount of children. And the children never outnumbered the adult mentors. They never outnumbered the breeders, because if they had, they wouldn't have had the resources to continue supporting the tribe. People would have gone into famine mode and gone extinct. And also, there was no such thing as the male-female roles many years ago. Ancient humans did whatever needed to be done. Men and women worked together. Women were big game hunters. And there was no such thing as a little picket fence suburb way back in the day that was based on the suburbs in heaven that we were trying to emulate through this divine pattern. The world was actually very different than my Mormon Christian patriarchal religion taught me it had been. So,
It really started to shift all of this mindset in the eugenics era, where they started to develop these ideas about what would make our society more powerful than other societies and would make it so that the white race could endure. And traditional wives were really born out of that time, according to everything that I've been reading from literal eugenics books from that era. So,
which is fine, eugenics, just in case we have
yeah.
new people that don't understand what that is, because that's a term that I've heard tossed around a lot, and I really didn't understand it. As a Mormon girl, I didn't go to Google and dive into what's eugenics. And when I finally did, as I was studying the Holocaust, a huge shock, huge eye opener. And I felt, here's what I felt. I felt this great sense of disappointment in the human race. I thought, if you put men in charge of fertility and breeding, they're going to treat us like a poodle factory, and they're going to breed for the fluffiest coat and the longest legs and the glossiest little nose. And it really does strip our fertility and that beautiful relationship that parents have with children into just a puppy factory. So
and really you defined it right there, where it's this concept that, oh, if we want to breed, if we want to have really good peas, we need to use really good seeds. If we want to have really good dogs, we need to have a really good mom, dad, and really good dad dog. If we want to have a good society made up of really strong, intelligent, healthy humans so that we can have the best society we possibly can have, we need to make sure that the only people having babies are the people who have good seed, right? And so they believed that somebody having a developmental disability, that's something that was wrong with the mom and the dad. And so if they could make it so that only the best people are giving birth by doing things like involuntary sterilization, by having somebody go in for an appendectomy and deciding to, while they are in writhing pain, determine whether or not they are a quote unquote moron or somebody who is intelligent to engage in society, but not smart enough to deserve to have kids. We're going to take out your ovaries while we're in there taking out your appendix.
So what's wrong with that? Because if you think about it, don't we as humans want to have like the happiest population? So
how I would just say, however, so I have a developmentally disabled son. I think I'm pretty smart. I would be able to pass whatever test they had given me. My ex-husband, he is a partner at an accounting firm. He is a very intelligent man. We are people who would have passed that test. Turns out that humans do not have the same outcomes as peas and puppies. And so
it's predictable because we have such a vast and diverse genetics pool.
And then above and beyond that, how many people were they saying? So they said things like women who are sex workers should not be having children because then they're going to raise sex workers. But they're not even factoring in the economic factors of that. Why is the daughter doing the same thing that the mom did? Why did the daughter not get the same opportunities as somebody from a wealthier family? And they were blaming it on genes when really it's a societal issue, not way more than it is a genetic issue.
And there's so many that and so many other reasons why it's problematic. And to me, in a nutshell, the reason why selective breeding in the human population is extremely problematic is that I deeply believe that every human being has the right for all of the basic life experiences. I believe that every human being has the right to have a shelter, to have a tribe around them, to have passion, to have food to eat, the sun on their shoulders. And I believe that every human has the right to reproduce. And if that's what they want to do, to hold their baby in their arms and to raise a child into adulthood so that they can spread their genetics to the next generation as well as sharing their culture and their way of life with the future. Not everybody chooses to have children, and there are certainly reasons that we'll talk about here in just a minute for why a lot of women are choosing not to have children. But should you decide that you do want to have children, that shouldn't be the right to just the tallest and the skinniest and the most muscular and the best looking and the high IQs. There should never be a litmus test for breeding and reproduction. The only litmus test should be, are you physically able to have this child, and can you physically, emotionally, financially care for this child? If not, do you have a tribe around you that can support you? That should be the only questionnaire that anyone has to answer before they become parents. So eugenics, certainly one of the worst things that the human race does, and it hasn't just happened in white supremacy. It didn't just happen in Europe. It's not just happening today in America. It's something that every human population who starts to have status, stratification, and power begins to lean into. This color of skin or this slant of the nose, this type of hair, these types of people are the best people. We're the only ones that we should reproduce. And that's just not fair. That's a great atrocity that human beings have committed. On the flip side of that, though, we have a lot of women today who are choosing not to have children. And Beth, I know that you see this all over the news. If you turn on CNN, if you click into PBS, BBC World News, wherever you're looking, the New York Times, the Atlantic, everybody's talking about our declining birth rates.
Which is so Handmaid's Tale, right? Like, why are we freaking out about this when we have plenty of people? I've researched it now for this episode, but
the people freaking out, and I have a couple of episodes on my YouTube channel where I talk about the declining birth rates, and I just think that it's time for us to adjust rather than replenishing our population, which is why the baby boom happened. That's why traditional trad wives were born in the first place. Was after World War I, we were deeply scared that we as a nation would cease to exist. Our leaders were also scared in general that communism was going to sweep the globe, that this American democracy that had offered so much freedom to people would cease to exist completely and be just a little teeny blip in the timeline of human history. And they realized that rapid population growth, which then would support a burgeoning economy, was the answer. And that's really always the answer to every civilization. Is built on goods. It's built on wealth. It's built on labor. That labor needs to be supplied with new babies. I actually have a substack article on this topic, Power, Priesthood, and Pussy. I have another one that I did as a follow-up to that, When the Breeders Rebel. And I kind of dive into how men have to control women's uteruses. They have to control our bodies because they can't populate a country without us. And unfortunately, after World War I and the Depression and that great scare, our government leaders decided that we had to have as many babies as we possibly could. And so they began very targeted marketing around what they were terming the traditional family, which again wasn't traditional at all, and really painting a picture. And as humans, being subconscious dominant and being very easily guided by imagery, we all had these little Norman Rockwell pictures bouncing around in our heads in the 1940s and 1950s. And the husband leaving the home with his little briefcase and going out into the world doing his very blue job as a provider for the family, which was then supported by concepts in Christianity. And the wife staying home in her high heels and her little flowy circle cut skirt, taking care of, was it 3.6 babies on average per woman during the baby boom? That became the ideal.
I had seen that it was like 5.4, but I might have been looking at it.
You're my data person. I'm the ideas person. So
yes.
Do that.
I had seen 5.7, but I also saw conflicting data from different sources as well. So, but it was way, way higher. But it does look like we're looking at 3.7 from one of these sources, but one of the sources said it was 5.4, I want to say. So they are just like extremely concerned that we are suddenly way, way down from that number. But the question is, was 3.7 births per woman actually a reasonable number for us to have a sustainable society? Like, we are already at such an overcrowded, we're using our resources way, way too much. We're absolutely draining Lake Powell. We are draining the Colorado River. Like, we are losing water at such quantities because we do have way more people than we have resources. So they like to paint this picture that it's this really beautiful utopia that existed back then. But it was a utopia for who? Maybe white men. That was really it. Women, even white women, could not have their own credit cards. We could not have our own houses. We couldn't start our own businesses. We could only have a certain subset of jobs. So anyway, they love this like dream that they have of this time that they thought was great. But who was it great for?
It is. So it's a fantasy. And when I see these little trad wife girlies on TikTok and YouTube acting out these little trad wifey lives, I'm almost 51. My great-grandmother was born in 1903. My grandmother was born in 1926. My mother was born in 1952, and I was born in 1974. So I was alive in the era of these women who had been the 1940s, 1950s trad wives, and my generation of women were still very much staying at home. And the fantasy wasn't even the reality at the time of my childhood. My grandmothers were the victims of domestic violence. My grandmothers were faced with what every woman in the 1940s and 1950s was faced with, which was that shifting structure from the farm and true tribalism, true American frontier, where grandma and grandpa and everybody was all on farms around their sons and daughters and cousins and multi-generational family members still living in close proximity to one another, raising children collectively and having that village, which really was the foundation of the American dream. As we shifted out of World War II, going into the trad wife era, really the golden era of the trad wife life, we see a lot of isolation. Women in the 1940s and 1950s complained a lot about just sitting at home. You watch movies where you see women joining PTOs and starting bridge clubs, because for the first time in human history, we had a structure that began to isolate women, both physically, actually like driving into a garage or carport, going inside their home, not living on the family compound or having multi-generational homes. And a lot of that was economically driven. We wanted people to have their own individual houses so that we could break up the family tribes, and mortgage companies could make money off of every member of the family. If my 3.6 kids or 5.3 kids or whatever the number is, if they all stay home and they live with me and we have a multi-generational tribe under one roof, the mortgage company is only making the money off of that one mortgage. But if they can get us to copy paste and go off into little homes in the suburbs, they can make more money. That wasn't necessarily completely beneficial for our relationships. I mean, in some ways it was, because we have autonomy. I don't have my mother-in-law breathing down my neck. I have my own home. But women, even in the 40s and 50s, started to see what Nobel Peace Prize winner Claudia Goldin has just validated in this Nobel Peace Prize, that women started to be very isolated and really lose the satisfaction for this lifestyle that was supposed to be so amazing.
And one of the other things in all of this is we have to think about the fact that our medical system has improved so much. So back then, my ex-father-in-law, he had a little sister who was developmentally disabled. She died by age 4. The medical system, the system for supporting disabled people, it did not exist very well at that time, and it's improved significantly. So while we might be having ours is 1.6 our birth rate is 1.6, where they say that for it to be sustainable, for us just to maintain the number that we have, it would be 2.1 births per woman, because we have to replace ourselves and our partner. So if our number is 1.6, then we're not replacing that. But the thing is, we're not losing children like we used to either.
That's true.
And you were correct. It was 3.7 for the US. For Niger, it's 6.7. Nigeria, it was 5.14. And so they were talking about how we're not keeping up with these countries in Africa. But
But these countries in Africa don't have some of the things that we want to have. So
the medical
we see
system.
the medical system. There's
HIV prevention, right? There's so many more kids that will die in these countries that are replacing kids at a far higher rate. And so that's one of the things that they're sitting there. They're like, oh, you guys aren't popping out enough babies. Okay, but we are in a society that's the wealthiest country in the world, right? We're hearing that all the time right now. Wealthiest country in the world. Why are we even in this discussion about the birth rate when we're going to be able to sustain and keep alive far more of the babies that are born here than if we had a more strained society?
And that is the question that Claudia dove into. So first of all, we do see, if you look at a quick graph of birth rates in general, just in the United States, in the early 1800s, it was an average of 7.1 children per woman. Women had good health. They had access to food. They were on homesteads where they had room for the kids to run around. They were typically in lifelong marriages. And the average age at the beginning of the 1800s, going into like the frontier period, moving out of colonialism, was a pretty good era in American history for health, for finances, and for relationships. So we see this huge population. Again, not that all of those children would live into adulthood. High infant mortality rate as well as high maternal mortality rate also. So a lot of them were dying, a lot of those children were dying, but it was a super high birth rate. Then we see that decline down, and it peaks obviously with the baby boom in America. And then we see this dip, and we have been steadily declining ever since. And you see a huge dip when I was born in the 1970s. And here's why. And this was globally, this wasn't just in America, because first of all, for the first time in human history, we had this amazing technology called dependable birth control, where if I took that little pill every single day, I could virtually prevent every pregnancy. Of course, there's a couple of humans walking around right now today that are the result of the pill failing or mommy forgetting to take it. But we had effective birth control. We could go down to the corner store and buy condoms. Like, it was easy breezy. Mm-hmm. We also had no-fault divorce. And we don't talk enough about the major shift that this was for declining birth rates, because a woman may get into a marriage, have her first two children, and then we see these big gaps between consecutive children for females in census records where she decides, this guy's deadbeat, he's dirtbag, I don't want to be with him anymore. So she can just decide to go down to the court and file for divorce, move back in with mom and dad, start her life over, move in with somebody else, and eventually maybe have another couple babies, but now she's had a gap in her fertility. We also see financial rights. In 1975, the year after I was born, literally just got goosebumps talking about this because I feel like I was here for this huge change on earth for women. That was the year of female independence in the US. That was the year that women could get their own bank accounts, that they could have their own credit cards, and that they could keep their own money. Imagine as a woman not even being able to have a credit card when the men are out there like getting all the credit that they want. We also started to see shifts in just basic housing, shifts in communities. I had aunts who were single cat ladies in the 60s and 70s. It was a sexual revolution. They had boyfriends, but they never married. They died as 9-year-old women, having lived single their whole entire lives. And then we also see in the 60s and 70s, we see this unchurching of the entire globe. We see Canada moving into secularism. We see for the first time declining rates in church attendance in the United States. And with the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s here in America, we see people not caring if they move in together, where rewind back to 1890, if you were going to move in with your boyfriend, you would have been marked in your community.
Oh, the shame.
Oh, the shame.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of these factors, we see this decline in birth rates that is initiated.
So there's also, it's really interesting. So in the eugenics book from 1934 that I was reading, they were talking about how concerning it was after World War I. So the men had gone away to war and then they came back, and they said that women were basically sexually stunted. And these women just weren't interested in sex, and they did not have the desire to have lots of babies. And so they were basically, with eugenics, trying to brainwash society. You need to have tons and tons of babies, right? But it was because all of these women realized, probably, in my opinion, if I'm speculating, they realized, holy crap, all of this marriage stuff is not what it's cracked up to be. And I've also wondered, Jennie, your thoughts about Disney coming in and brainwashing generations of girls that we needed a prince.
Story.
So,
Someday my prince will come, and then I don't have to get a job and an education, and he'll just take care of
I'm
me.
just a princess. And I'm gonna live in his castle, right? And so I find it really interesting that the era of Disney came in the eugenic era as well to make women start believing your life will be complete when a man is in it.
Coincidence? I think not.
I don't think so.
I think not. Just on a little side note here, I love your theory. And there's a lot of research from sociologists around what happened with the women going to work during World War II. And I know firsthand from my feisty grandma, Katie May, that absolutely changed her life. My grandma, being born in 1903, she was the youngest of 12 or 13 kids. They lived in a literal one-room house in the Ozarks. She was descended from a German father and a Scottish mother that were only second-generation immigrants, extremely poor. They were absolutely destitute, poverty-stricken. Her first job at age 12, 13 was as a topless waitress way back in the 1920s at the Lake of the Ozarks. It's some nefarious restaurant. I don't even know who was attending these restaurants back in the days. So, that era, the speakeasies and all that. And she was a topless waitress. And she talked to me throughout my childhood about my teenage years. She was telling these stories in young childhood. As a teen, she told me, at your age, basically I had to sell my looks and depend on men giving me tips to get ahead. And then she had a boyfriend that became a sugar daddy that kind of supported her. Then World War II happens. And my grandmother leaves the Ozarks because she's recruited by some company that brings her out to Portland, Oregon, where now generations of my family have lived, to work in the shipyards. And she literally welded ships in the Portland harbor so that they could send them off to the battlefronts. Mm-hmm. She worked independently throughout all of World War II. And during that time, she divorced her husband, the boyfriend that had turned into a husband, who was an alcoholic who beat her. And she had that little taste of independence that would never leave her. My grandma then was a single mom to my dad for most of his childhood until he was well into his teen years, I believe. I'm not sure the exact dates. She got herself a job in courthouse. She was 20-something. And that little taste of financial independence showed her a pattern that I don't have to depend on a man. She would remarry, but she would maintain a job. She would maintain financial autonomy at a time in American history when a lot of women did just automatically go back home. But she was, I think, just tired of leveraging her looks and her body for men to pay for her stuff and decided it's probably better if my finances are in my own hands. And that was a big problem for the people who wanted us to buy into the American family scheme. Because there were women like that who weren't buying it.
It's so interesting because my mom definitely taught me to grow up and be a trad wife, but my mom is a very career-oriented woman. She's a nurse. She's a nurse practitioner now, very driven, very career-oriented. So it was interesting to be raised that I'm supposed to want to be one thing, but I wasn't given that example either anyway.
And for a lot of us, we had those World War II grandmas who then raised the next generation to be the trad wives because, again, we were sold this beautiful fantasy picture. Mm-hmm. And I think that your mom probably thought that's a better life. Beth won't have to go to work. Beth won't have to do the things that I had to do. But so here's a theory that I have. It's almost like when we aren't trapped in the trad wife trap, we don't get married and spend our whole lives having babies. Like, newsflash, it sucks. I'm personally a regretful mother. Not that I don't love my children, but I didn't want to have children. It financially and in a lot of ways destroyed my life when my marriage ended 6 years ago. And women are discovering at a rapid pace that trad wife trap is not appealing. And many of them don't want to be stuck in it. And thus, our population is declining. So this Nobel Prize, here's what she dug into. And again, Claudia Goldin is, what did we say she is? She's an economic historian and a labor economist. And she has been studying global economies all over the world. She's studied South Korea and America and probably some others that I haven't read all of her published studies on. And she came into it with this question of why. Like, we know what's going on. We know that there's birth control now. We know that there's no fault divorce. We know that there's all of these other things. But why specifically right now in the year 2025, why are there women within just a few steps of my front door and yours that are deciding not to date, not to marry, or maybe get married, but sterility by choice? Why are women not reproducing? Why is the birth rate declining? And of course, there are numerous factors that go into the declining birth rates, but she came up with a very interesting hypothesis. Her theory just won her this Nobel Peace Prize. And it was so beautiful and so simple and so resonant with me. So, Beth, I want to hear what you think about it too. But in a nutshell, here's what she said. She said that men have modernized. We have this industrial revolution. We have this whole new way of existing in the world. We're no longer home-based economies. Men aren't just plowing their own fields or opening up a little watch shop in the entry level of their home. Men have got college degrees. They have learned a variety of new technologies, and they're out in the world capitalizing on those things and building vast wealth. Women, on the other hand, we didn't. Like I say, the men have moved into this modern era, but women, we're living the same lives as our 1950s moms and our 1920s grandmas and our Civil War great grandmas, but we're just in a different setting. We're doing the same things in the little picket fence ranch house of the 60s or the tri-level of the 80s, or for me, the burgeoning suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona with the stucco houses and the red tile roofs. So our setting is changing, but as women, our lives are not. We haven't modernized. We are not learning the job skills. If we are getting educations, in large part, women are still not being educated the same. And this was the real straw on the camel's back that she found in the study. Within the walls of our own homes, within our relationships and our families, we are still very much living this, what's supposed to be a historic life, but is a new invention of a couple of generations ago. And we have not evolved. And she found in her study that one of the biggest reasons women aren't having babies is found right here. I'm still doing all of the dishes. I'm still just focused on serving my husband. I'm still carpooling the kids to their little gymnastics and their dance classes. And he's off living this big, broad life. So why in the world would I want to do this? And Claudia talks about how that we've had this massive shift in what women want and really what men want too. Our relationships are very different. Men want to be in love with their partners. Men want emotional connection with their children. But anytime we have a shift, the structures and the systems around those societal shifts take time to build. I have this idea that I want this new house, but I have to buy the land and hire the architect and do all of the excavating and put up the frame. And it's going to be a couple of years until that house, that structure is there. We've had this vision now as women of the independence, of the partnerships and relationships, of blurring the pink and the purple roles with the pink and blue roles with our homes, and really turning them into this lovely shade of lavender and household responsibilities and parenting and stepping into a new era. But none of the structure around us has caught up. And the men in particular don't even know that it's happened. They don't realize that we women are like Fred Flintstone in our own homes. And they're off in Jetsonville flying around in their little individual flying saucers and pushing the button for Rosie to give them their dinner. So that was the finding of her study. And that was basically her conclusion about everything.
That's so interesting. I think that's absolutely true. I think that there's this other issue that for me, I find I'm a regretful mother, not necessarily because I had kids. I regret bringing my kids into a world that I didn't understand how horrible of a world it is. And I think of the song Labor by Paris Paloma, where she says something about, I think about if we had a daughter, I'd watch and could not save her. And so I look at the fact that I brought my daughter into this world Am I so happy she gets to have human experiences and experience life? Absolutely. Also, I feel so much guilt for bringing her into a society that is trying to make women into nothing but homemakers and trad wives again, still. And she doesn't have rights over her own body. And the fact that I have brought a child into such a horrible state, if I had been allowed by my religious programming to wait to have kids, I wouldn't. And not because I wouldn't want kids, but because I don't want my kids to suffer through this society.
Agreed. And I think that's a really important. I'm glad that you say that, because it's important to point out when people dialogue around regretful motherhood, that doesn't mean that I regret my 4 children and my 3 steps. Right. I don't regret them as humans. I certainly regret the timing in which I had kids, my lack of preparation, the way that I wasn't able to support them. I'm still not able to support them. I struggle to pay rent thanks to my trad life of 24 years. You can regret aspects of it in the way that you've done it and engaged in it, but not regret the children. And I think a lot of people are regretful mothers. I very seldom hear from someone who says, it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. So yeah, certainly it's a huge factor in it. So in this study, the one thing that really jumped out at me was, because she's an economist and specifically an economic historian, she does a lot of comparisons in the Nobel Peace Prize between how economies used to be set up in the United States and South Korea and other places, and then how they are today. And one of the ways in which she says that men have left women in the dust, like literally we're supposed to still be Ma Ingalls, and men are out there engaging in this modern life. And one of the factors was that home-based business economy. As soon as men started taking their little briefcases and walking out the door and going to work, then women stopped generating any type of revenue. Where with the small businesses, the women were still part of it. My 7 great-grandmother, her name was Chloe Howard. She was a first-generation French immigrant. She immigrated from France, for whom my Chloe is named. I literally named Chloe after Chloe. She was a landowner, and she got married, and they shared all of the profits on everything. We actually have some of her records and some of her unoriginal handwriting. And we don't do that as today. If the husband goes off to the office job, I don't have any ownership in anything that's generating revenue. That economic shift has created huge disparities. In many ways, we as women truly are living in like this Ma Ingalls lifestyle, because we don't have the education, we don't have the job skills. So I'm just relegated to the servant's work at home, where my husband's off doing things that I don't have the training for and I don't even understand. Sometimes I feel like I've just come out of the long winter or on the banks of Plum Creek, and I can't even imagine the career world that my partner is navigating right now. And as a result, that leaves a lot of women right now, especially the younger ones, are the Gen Zs and the millennials, and moving into some of the young Gen X that are growing up. These younger women are looking at this and they are seeing we live in a really complicated economy that nobody's prepared me for. I haven't had those leadership opportunities. And here's what I know. 50% of marriages fail. A lot of them are coming from failed marriages now. And I've watched my mom or my aunt or whoever have her life destroyed because of that. And I've also seen how difficult it is for these women to raise babies. And I don't want to do that. And we see these younger generation of women scrambling to step for the first time truly into this modern economy, scrambling to get their educations, scrambling to find whether it's a soft job or a pink job, or some of them going out and competing against other CEOs and opening businesses and doing really things that we would have considered masculine even a generation ago, so that they can catch up with modernity. Beth, how do we say that? Modernity.
I think so.
But the tricky thing is, they're not seeing a way to do that with a baby and little baby Bjorn. And so they're just choosing not to have babies. And the men are stepping in and saying, hey, let's have a baby and I'll make sure that I watch it half the time. And I'll take paternity leave off. And I'm going to make sure that I do half the chores. I think that until, and according to this Nobel Peace Prize, until the men shift and we have those societal structures around us, the paid maternity leave, healthcare for our children. I have struggled since my divorce to literally put groceries on the table and provide basic needs, housing, shelter, transportation. Until we have those societal structures that support women, I think the birth rate continues to go down.
Absolutely. And the longer that we have so many men just absolutely gaslighting and denying what we're trying to tell them, why are we going to sleep with them? And I just sit here and I think about the fact that if I had to break up with the guy that I am dating now, there's no chance I would ever date a straight man ever again. I would date a bi man, maybe, but
Choice
I'm not.
lesbianism. I read an article about
Not
choice
about this.
lesbianism.
About what?
Choice lesbianism.
Yeah, no, literally. So I have gone out with women and I have gone out with trans people. And I don't know that I would go back to, I have the perfect straight boyfriend on the planet. Nobody else will be able to touch that.
Yeah.
Nobody, no.
Only two good men, I believe,
on the planet. Yep, exactly.
I think both of our partners. So maybe let's end with that and then we'll do our little final wrap up here.
Yeah.
My partner was raised very old fashioned. He was raised like actual early frontier type of lifestyle in the 1970s because he grew up on a farm in a tiny little community in Idaho where, very much like the Mormons, they'd all immigrated together, a whole band of German Lutherans. And so he had grandma on the corner and his uncles across the street. And he grew up with, there aren't gender roles. Everybody has to work the farm. So if his mom needed him in the house, helping with dinner, he would be in the house. If his dad needed him out in the fields, he was out in the fields. Mom also didn't have responsibility for taking care of the kids 100%. Often, and this is the way that most of human civilization has always been for as long as we know that humans have been on this earth, the fathers spent a lot of time with children because the dad would need the child to go out and work with them. Child labor laws kind of put a kibosh on that in America, but Kev would go out in the fields with his dad. I think he talks about being 8, 9 years old in Idaho and being able to drive the little truck around the farm. And they put on a tractor as soon as he could reach the gear shift. And he was out there farming with his dad if they needed him out there farming with his dad. And that meant that his mom wasn't taking him to play dates and running him to his club soccer team. Mom had a lot of relief from the childbearing duties because of that. So Kevin, having this really well-balanced and in many ways genderless background, is the most ideal partner. Like the first night that he spent the night at my house, I would take a shower. We were getting ready to go to our Christian church together back when I was Christian before I converted into full-blown wild, raw atheism. I was taking a shower and I had some laundry baskets just against the wall in my master bedroom. And I come out and all of my laundry is folded. And he has like a little pair of my undies and a sock. And he's like pristine folding my undies. And after 24 years of marriage, I don't think that unless I was in the hospital with my ovarian tumor, that my ex-husband had ever, nor would he ever, because that's a pink roll. And that was not something that he should do. Kevin cooks 3 nights a week. I cook 2 nights a week. We have this rotating schedule. And there's never a question of this is my responsibility, this is my duty, or this is a man's duty. It's who's going to do this best and who wants to do this. And if he doesn't do it best, but I'm busy or I'm out of town or something, he'll take over and we can both do everything. And just the emotional connection too of a man who's been well raised to be emotionally intuitive and connected. And Steve is so sweet.
So in tune. So gentle. So yeah. The best. This is going to sound really wild, but people are like, what's your favorite thing about him? And I'm like, well, he doesn't assault me. And my thing is that men in general, that's the bar. Like the fact that he is thoughtful and gets consent for everything every single time. That is like something that I just don't. I think men think that they get consent and they don't. But this man actually does. And
we'll be talking about that.
Never go back.
Episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we have to think about what are we going to be doing to fuck the patriarchy in the long run. And I think we just raise daughters who won't settle for men, except men like that.
So if we're looking at this as here's the problem, women are still doing all the laundry at home. They don't have the same economic advancements and the access to the technology and accumulating resources and things that the men do. And they don't see a way that they can break into and catch up with this modern world and still have a baby on one hip. Then if we're looking at what's the flip side of that is raising our daughters.
We raise them to not settle for that.
We raise them to not settle for that. But can we do that and also say, and by the way, we need to increase our population, so you're going to need to have at least 2.1 babies? I don't think we can. And this is where the patriarchy is still grasping for control. We have right now this whole entire congressional committee that is researching population decline, and they are sending out alarm bells and they're talking about it all the time. And we women aren't listening because we truly are just ready to fuck the patriarchy. And sorry for my grandmas who listen who say that I cuss. This is the one cuss word that we have to say in every episode because we are going to wrap it every single time with how do we say fuck the patriarchy? And I think that's it. I think we raise those daughters. I want to show you a photo that Chloe got me for my birthday. This was during the whole man versus bear thing. My daughter's 22 and she's the first, almost 22. She's the first woman in the history of my family, as far back as we can remember, my direct family line, to turn 21 and not be married or have a baby. And I've just fucked the patriarchy with Chloe. I have literally the patriarchy by raising this little daughter. She just moved out. She has her culinary arts degree. She's looking to open a restaurant. She's building a whole life for herself. She does not have a boyfriend. She is fine as fire, and she will not date because she doesn't see the value. Here's for anybody who's watching, little Chloe is in the white shirt here.
So sweet.
So for my birthday, during the whole man versus bear thing, this little feisty daughter bought me this framed
I love it.
a grizzly bear, and all wrapped up, super cute. She said, hang this by your desk, and Mom, your life would have been better if you had picked the bear. That's how we we raise our daughters. And for those of you are out there who are not our daughters, but we wish that we could just adopt you into our girls talk circle, we've got to start fucking the patriarchy. It's time for us to break out of what Claudia Goldin discovered in the study, that we're all still being Ma Ingalls and living out these little house on the prairie lives. It's time for us to, in whatever way you can, catch up with the modern world that the men have been living in for 3 generations now.
Yeah.
We have to catch up. We have to find ways to buy our own homes, to forge new little businesses and build retirements for ourselves. Do you know, Beth, that less than 80% of stay-at-home moms have any retirement of their own?
I have nothing. Yeah.
I have nothing. And every single month I say this, I don't know if I can pay rent next month because our expenses are greater than our income every month. And my income is variable.
Mm-hmm.
We have nothing. Less than 80% of stay-at-home moms, which means that adult females in their elderly years are the highest poverty demographic in the United States. And we don't have a structure that's caught up with that. Men can divorce us now. They can find a new hookup on Tinder. They can leave. But we haven't built that structure around us to protect us until there's an unemployment for displaced homemakers, until the state provides retirement for mothers and makes sure that we don't have to pay divorce attorneys if our marriages crumble, that we put that money in our own bank account so that we can make sure that we're not homeless like I was. Until some of those structures come up, it's all on us.
Yep.
We need to make decisions going into the future that help us to catch up.
Absolutely.
All right. We always like to end with the 2 worst evils of the patriarchy are alienation and triangulation. Triangulation is when unstable people draw in a third party to wage war against somebody. And then that alienation is just feeling like you're not belonging. There may not necessarily be a third person involved. So what's happening in our homes with these traditional families, with women not being able to work, has the patriarchy triangulated women against the rest of society? Or is this just a case of alienation or both?
I think it's both, but I think that the triangulation piece is the most interesting to me because that's where we get this idea that J.D. Vance wants us to have lots of American babies, but they're kicking all the brown people out that they can. So AKA, they want more white babies. And I don't even know that women know how much they're being triangulated against other countries and societies and people by this ideology. So I think the triangulation is such an important part of the conversation, but there's certainly alienation in it as well, where if you're a religious woman, all of these people, they don't like you. And so you better just have a baby and just really anchor into our community because we're the only ones that will actually love you.
Libs is such a catchword these days. Okay, I agree. I think it's both. I think we have triangulation and alienation. So triangulation, you always have to have an unstable relationship, and then one person in that unstable relationship is trying to draw in an outside person or thing to stabilize it. So I think that the unstable relationship is with our government, our pastors, the patriarchy, and women. That is the unstable relationship. And rather than the men very helpfully sitting down with the women and saying, what do you want? Like for our government, I wish that Donald Trump, like Donald John, give me a call. I will personally share my cell phone with you. I want you to call me and ask what women want. I want, if my 24-year marriage ends, that I can go apply for unemployment just like any other unemployed person, so that I'm not living in my car peeing in a red Solo cup, which is what actually happened to me. I want paid maternity leave. I want, if I have a child, I have guaranteed health insurance for that child. That Obamacare that Trump is so opposed to, that's what I want. And I want my partner to do the dishes and cook and drive the kids to school and share my tasks around the house and support me in my career. But since the government's not going to come ask us what we want, and they're not probably going to make changes, I really see triangulation as like the biggest tool that they're leaning into. So they're trying to pit the women who are trad wives against all the woke liberal feminists. When J.D. Vance gets up there and says that whole cat lady thing, his unstable relationship is with the cat ladies. He's not connected to us, and he's not willing to make any change or negotiate. So he's going to triangulate by getting on national TV and saying, all you cat ladies don't have babies. And now every MAGA voter in the entire American South is alienated against Kamala Harris and all of the single women. And I think that they're alienating us against other countries too, or triangulating us against other countries. And I also see a lot of triangulation from like the government and like the pastors, those people in those power positions, triangulating women against their own husbands. And
I was just going to say that. I was going to say that there's the unstable relationship between the pastors and the politicians and men, and women are the ones who have to come in. I remember being raised Mormon, and there was just this ideology that you need to be a really good, righteous woman to make sure that your man stays in line in the church. So that was your job.
That is the woman's job, right?
There's nothing else we're useful for. Cleaning houses and making sure men go to church.
And I truly thought that was like my only role in life. All right, Beth, I think we've covered a lot of great topics here. I'd love to hear what you guys all think. And Beth, also go over to Beth's channel. Beth Magnetic is amazing. Her Death by Patriarchy is so fabulous. Dives into a lot of Mormon issues, a lot of church boys gone wrong, and how that becomes fatal. Also, if you'd like to follow me over on Substack, that's where I dive deep into some of these topics. And I really apologize to my Substack followers that I have not been keeping up with my Substack as much as like you have paid for me to do. But I've been in the middle of my movie production with my team of Emmy-nominated writers, and I think you'd probably want me doing that more than just writing Substacks. But I do have a couple that I'll be publishing this week. I'm, of course, always home here on YouTube at Life Take 2. And Beth, do we have a Patreon up and running yet?
No, but we will very soon.
So for the people watching in the future, we have an amazing Patreon. So we are looking for some of our first donors. Beth and I are not currently sponsored. And as women coming to these platforms, we don't always have the resources. If you've listened to this episode, you can understand why we don't have all of the resources. So we do depend on you to support our Patreon. We're looking for some of those key donors to help us produce more great content like this in the months to come. And we will be dropping a new episode every week. Thank you so much for watching. We will be hanging out in the comments to read your thoughts. Beth, I'm going to let you wrap it up.
Thanks. Thanks, guys, so much for coming here. And if you have specific topics that you want us to cover on Girl Talk, let us know. Leave a comment or reach out to us. Let us know what you really want us to be digging into and discussing. So we always love to be able to give you guys what you really want to hear. So we will plan to see you guys next week on Girl Talk.
Perfect. Thanks, Beth. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.